Hi, and welcome to my channel. Today, I want to introduce you all to Brian Allan. Brian is an attorney who is working in the cyberspace, and he has a new book coming out shortly called Building a Cyber Risk Management Program. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Charlene. We have common taste in colors, your wall and my shirt. I would blend right in.
It was coordinated. We had this all planned ahead of time. Yes, absolutely. So Brian, why don't we take the first little bit here and give us some background about, so you're an attorney, but you're also working in the cyberspace. How did this happen?
Yeah. So real quick, my background is mostly physical security. I was doing some intellectual property lobbying with the Motion and Picture Association recording industry. 9/11 happened. Time Warner's big client says, come start up a security department. We were doing the gamut of physical crisis, and eventually, obviously cyber popped its head up, and we dove right in, and but see things from a, sometimes from a legal perspective, definitely from a risk perspective. I am not a technologist.
I like that combination of the legal and the cyber. And so often people who are in the cyberspace, they come from the technology side. So I really like that you have a really fresh perspective to bring to the audience. I come from the tech side, but I need to learn more about what's the legal part, all involved in the cyber. So you have a new book coming out. Can you give us a hint of when you think that'll be available? And we'll put a link down below.
Perfect. So the book is Building a Cyber Risk Management Program. And we're expecting, I don't know, September, October. Our chapters are due May 1. We just pushed it to June 1. So a lot of work to do. But it's a change. We are in a changing environment. The economy is changing, and digitalization is moving things fast. Yeah. The regulators are looking at cyber differently. The SEC is looking at cyber differently, and oversight control from boards and executives. CISOs are looking at it differently, right? We've got budget fatigue. The business is expecting us to move fast. There are limitations, and there's no zero risk environment. And with the speed of digitalization, that awareness that there isn't zero risk is really coming into this reality, right? I think sometimes regulators are, they look and say, hey, be compliant, best practice, meet these standards. The conversation with executives is tell us what you need and we'll give that to you, meaning that at the end of the day, we're safe. And that's just not true. And, I think now, more importantly, and probably more prevalently than ever, right? Because digitalization is not just about ones and zeros and data, right? We came from this third industrial revolution of information technology to digitalization. This is different. We are at the forefront of the fourth industrial revolution. We are right in the beginning. So, the IT industrial revolution was what, 1970 to today? I mean, where are we in 50 years from now? I think it's exponential. And you watch just what ChatGPT just did. It's hard to think about where technology was before November, with all of a sudden it's on the forefront of everybody's minds. And, and so it's not just these ones and zeros, data, social security numbers, credit card numbers, intellectual property. It is, even small, I'm going to say small decisions, but decisions of business leaders to say, let's implement this tool. And because we can now centralize business and, limit headcount, and what you've done is concentrate risk, right? Because of a business decision, not necessarily the ones and zeros, but if that system goes down, now there's disruption, right? And that this entire conversation of resiliency that's exploding.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
so the idea behind the cyber risk management program, and I'll call it the CRMP, is that we need to be more mature and more programmatic, right? So how do we get more mature? We get more mature through making this programmatic, that there's a framework, there are outputs, we're meeting criteria, whatever that criteria is, and I'll share on how we got to develop the CRMP. But if it's not programmatic, it's not trusted, right? It's aren't these consistent outputs. And, I think partly what security, like one of the biggest hurdles that we have is security is seen as tactical. We're perceived as tactical. The touch points from business leaders and executives is mostly tactical. And, with digitalization and this movement of, implementation of technology into every part of the business and every department and all these decisions, it's got to become more strategic. And the strategic element of security is the risk conversation.
Yep.
And
I absolutely agree. I like the way you brought this back around to being tactical, and you started off saying, it's not just the technology, it's more about the business decisions. And you have so much in this first piece I want to kind of unpack a little bit. So part of what you said, and you and I have had some conversations about this as well, so I know that we are very like-minded on this. Part of what you brought up that is so relevant, and I think you're absolutely right, that risk management has changed, and it's changed in the boardroom, it's changed for the CISO, comes back to how cyber attacks have changed. They are not what they were back in the day. They are cyber criminals. They can pivot on a dime. Their approaches and how they move through a supply chain is so strategically different than what we ever saw before in the short history here. I think you're absolutely right. And I'm curious what you think, without getting too deep into any particular situations, this business of who's really responsible and who will be held accountable, because there's been a lot of big news articles out there where, executives make decisions, and then, unfortunately, one person, takes the responsibility, and it's kind of a shared responsibility. How do you think the dynamic of what's happened in just the last 3 years is changing? And I think this is maybe part of why you're saying this book is so different.
Yeah.
Changed.
So let me just explain a little bit about why it's different, right? The programmatic piece is critical because we have security practitioners or risk practitioners. We know that, right? You protect something because there's a risk and somebody may take it, break it, steal it, whatever it is. And you take efforts to stop it. That's risk management. The programmatic piece is important because of, one, there's oversight obligations for the board and the executives today. It's coming from the SEC. They're about to release these proposed rules next month or the month after, right? That talk about governance, risk management, strategy, and incident response, which are all components of a CRMP that we talk about. But we have collectively done, I have a risk register and I do assessments and I do this. That's not risk management, right? Those are risk tools. And so
but that's what everybody thinks.
Yes. Yeah. And so the programmatic piece is really what we kind of have to get our heads around, not just for compliance reasons now and oversight on the board, but, with this speed of risk and, budget fatigue, this has to become defendable in some ways and transparent to save. And that consistency is the programmatic. And there's a ridiculous amount of nuance to this, which is good. It's healthy. And I think it's where we're going to mature to. Your point on liability, right, is, and not just liability of like incidents happen and everybody points fingers. I think there's going to be different finger pointing, right? If the security folks don't make risk transparent and something happens and you've been kind of communicating, hey, here's our maturity level, we're getting at this maturity level, but not communicating the risk of not being the top maturity level, because there's going to be risk in there, then there isn't transparency of risk and there will be finger pointing. There will also be finger pointing now, I think, to boards, executives, public companies, if they don't have cyber risk management programs in place, like if they don't have the right oversight. And the courts are establishing this, right? There's a quick set. I'll get to this quick. There's a set of cases called the Caremark cases, right? That establish board level liability. The first case is Caremark. They said, board, you have to act in good faith, right? When you have this oversight obligation. The second is this Marchand case, a company called Bluebell, and people died of listeria, and they were making, they were making ice cream. And the court said, if you don't have a risk-informed system in place, you're not acting in good faith, right? And then Boeing happened, and the Boeing court said, not only do you need a risk-informed system in place, but you have to apply it to everything mission critical. And in that case, right, it was airline safety and food safety, and you can't tell me that cyber is not becoming mission critical, right? And so we are heading down this path, and I don't think we should necessarily build programs just for compliance reasons, but there are benefits too for security practitioners, engagement in business as the business moves in this speed of digitalization. So finger pointing, I think there'll be this tactical finger pointing. Could we have done better? Did you do all the right things? Did we have the right insights into our business and third and fourth parties? And do we have good hygiene? Do we patch the systems? And then there will be, are the right people at the table making the right decisions? Are they informed enough? Do we have a right strategy, right?
Yeah.
Executing the right resources. And so I think we're heading down this, and the reason the program piece, and I know it's a long answer, and the reason for this program piece is, it's got to be a program like a disaster recovery program, like an identity access management program, right? You need a cyber risk management program that has a framework and outputs. It's not just this ad hoc approach.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. And I think you're right. I think what's happening in the courts and this pressure and what's been happening in the last couple of years is going to change the dynamic of the conversation. So I'm really excited that your book is coming out all at the same sort of time. This is going to, I think, end up being a really good resource for people moving forward to have that kind of mindset about how they approach it for businesses of any size.
Yeah.
I just really do. I think your timing is perfect. I think your approach to it is spot on. I love what you're doing in that space. Let me ask you now, what do you see as maybe some of the biggest cyber challenges in general that people are facing? I mean, we talked a little bit about, cyber criminals, ransomware, just the speed of attacks. What do you see as some of the changes? You mentioned ChatGPT, for example.
Yeah, I speed and the unknown, right? When I was a chief security officer, the execs would always say, "Hey, what keeps you up at night?" And I said, "What I don't know." Because if I know it, we can protect it, we can assure it, we can accept it. Right? We'll figure this out. It's what I don't know. And I think, digitalization is going down that path, right? Who in the business is making decisions to use tools that's going to concentrate a risk or, and not intentionally, right? It's part of business. And then, I think the other risk is the risk of business substitution. So digitalization's moving fast and, companies can be substituted, their products can be substituted quickly. So what does that mean? That means businesses have to move fast. And that means they have to take risk. And so the security space of like, hey, let's protect this, let's shoot for a maturity level, doesn't work in that environment because companies have to go fast, right? And so we need to adjust how we interact, what our role is, right? The role of security is to guide a business through a security risk decision-making process. That's the role of security. Yeah, and then everyone's like, oh, it's protection. No, protection's the outcome of or an effect of a control, right? But the role, and that's the part that will help us like manage speed and uncertainty.
Yep. I absolutely agree with you. I hope that businesses can look at risk and adopt some of what we learned from Agile. So there are two pieces I'll add to the conversation. One, research tells us that companies that can make decisions quickly have substantial increased likelihood of financial stability, earning capability, everything else, because they become agile and the decision-making process isn't bogged down. And absolutely this idea that it has to be done quickly and it has to be, wrapped up into critical, and the old way of thinking about siloed businesses just doesn't work.
Yeah. One of the challenge that's significant is, the CRMP is not necessarily a CISO, director, VP of security program, right? This is an executive level program. It helps protect them. It's business strategy. It's alignment with risk. And so, one of the big challenges is going to be if your executives don't understand this, if they don't appreciate risk management, the outputs, the engagement with business, right? Their mindset is, yeah, that's great security, but protect us. That's a massive challenge. And that's a big hurdle. And there's a lot of education that needs to happen. It's necessary education. And I think the security folks can do that from with their space into the executive shoes. And then also the executives are going to start seeing training in this when the SEC rules get released and and there's liability, right? That will trickle down. I don't know if it's happening fast enough. But that's those, there's going to have to be a connection between the two. And, in some of the consulting work I've done in the past, there's a big gap, and it's not easy to close sometimes.
Yep, no, absolutely. I agree. And I see that as well, especially if an organization has not linked the executive level objectives with everything else that the organization is doing. If there's not a close linkage there, there's constant friction. I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah.
Let me pivot and ask you now a different question. Let's look at this from the small business perspective. Are there any suggestions, recommendations you can give small business takeaways from this idea of having a risk management program? Because I think that's really important from the beginning of the business to have that mindset. Is there something you can give?
Yeah, my
Give us
goodness.
small business to take away?
Yeah, my goodness, what a tough question.
Sorry, set you up for that.
It's good. It's good. It's a great question. It's a tough question.
I hear so many times when I talk to small businesses and founders especially, that this doesn't apply to them, that this is something for big organizations. And I see you shaking your head. I have the same thought. I'm like, no, you have to think about this from the beginning. And in fact, I try and tell them that, this could be a differentiator if you're going in front of VC, if they understand that you know how to manage risk. That's important.
Yeah, look, and big businesses can withstand a lot of pain, right? Small businesses will get crushed by some of these issues.
Yes.
And there's value in risk management. I was recently talking to a board of director with a very, very large company, a Fortune 50 recently. And we said, and I know this is not a small business, but I said,
but it's applicable.
It is, because the conversation was about the value of risk management, right? And, what is the value? And really the value is that you can make a more, an informed strategic decision. There's value in that. But they don't necessarily see security as a risk function all the time. They don't necessarily see that output, and partly because the security folks are not giving them that output. But he said, yeah, absolutely. And I said, that's the value of security, right? Is that if done right, your team, your business can see, that they're being informed of the risks that they face and decisions that they're making on a day in and day out basis. And and then they're making more informed decisions in an environment that has tremendous risks. And he's like, I said, is there value in that? And he said, yes. So a small business that doesn't have resources to expend on this and this has the same value, right? I mean, but that has got to come from the executives. That does not come from security, right? They have to value that they're in a risky environment. Whenever you're in the digital environment, and this isn't, the sky's falling type conversation. It's the reality in where we are. And, they like the value of them grabbing onto this type of conversation is that they will be more informed. Their business leaders will be more informed. It doesn't mean they have to make different decisions. It doesn't mean you have to protect everything. But you need to be able to communicate and understand where your risks are and have that strategic conversation. So, the small business challenge is, it's not, oh, I don't have resources to that. We've got limited resources. I've got 2 people in my security team, or maybe 1. That's even more the reason why you've got to be more educated, right? So, the challenge is, getting an executive in the small business, attention to say, do you want to be more informed of this? You go through business leaders and executives. What's the number one risk that you're facing? It's cyber or some kind of, human resource component, right? They can't get the right employment. And if it's that critical, it's got to come from them. It's not a resource issue. It's about,
I agree.
Yeah, it's about how much commitment do you want to make in being informed about something like this. And that's not it doesn't have to be complicated, right? The cyber risk management program is adaptable, it's scalable. And some of it is how granular do you want to get? Don't be granular at all, but your idea of risk is not going to be, you're not going to get into depths of business, but that's okay. And that's a risk acceptance of itself, right?
Yes. And I find that a lot of them, they feel like they don't have a risk because they're using a third party, and they don't realize Well, just because you're outsourcing it, that doesn't mean the risk went away. As long as they are aware of the risk they're taking when they make those decisions,
Yeah.
I think that's the foundation for the small business.
Yeah.
But I love the direction you're headed with this. I can't wait for the book to come out. I want you to give us the information of where we can look for the news of when it's coming out, so that we can all go get a copy when it comes out. And we'll update this when it does come out in October. You said September, October. So
thank you. It's a ton of work and years worth of work. And I have a colleague, Brandon Bapst, that's been, my partner in this whole thing. And it's been enlightening. There's tremendous depth in here. People should not be intimidated by the conversation, right? Jump in. It is where the value is in security. It's where the strategy is. It's the art, right? Got so much of the tactical things. The art of security is this: how do we find balance of risk and reward, engage in the business in that conversation? And this kind of makes it programmatic, gives us some structure. And these aren't Brian and Brandon's words, right? We're taking case law, standards, regulatory language, NACD content, World Economic Forum. So it's all there. We're just trying to put it together.
I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it. Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you, Charlene.
Okay.